All right. As I said, I'm Michael Nelson from Old Dominion University. That's in Norfolk, Virginia. That's southeastern, it's about 3 hours south of Washington, D.C. And I'm part in the computer science department. I'm part of the Web Science and Digital Libraries Research Group. All right, so one of the things that I often get asked is, how come you're interested in web archiving? So I'll give a little biographical detour, but first we need to recalibrate when I talk about the past and history and so forth. I realize we're in Europe and those mean different things. So this is an American notion of past, right? So bear with me. All right. So I grew up in Virginia, and this is a postcard of Richmond, where the capital of the Confederacy in the U.S. Civil War was. And even though I grew up in Hampton Roads, it's a little bit south of that, in Virginia, we talked about the Civil War like it happened yesterday. And we're still trying to figure out how to win it and so forth. We haven't figured that out yet. But so you grow up culturally sort of always being aware of the past. The first job I took was at NASA Langley Research Center, which is the first NASA center. It was established in 1970. It was called NACA at the time. Again, remember 1917 in U.S. terms, that's very, very ancient. And so I would work with and go to lunch with people who literally took us to the moon, and you can't help but sort of be absorb some of the notion of cultural heritage and institutional knowledge. And that's how I sort of became interested in going from the computing center to working with the library. All right. One of the questions that I often get asked is, why do we care about the past? And we submitted a paper to the WWW conference 2010, and this is a quote from one of the reviewers that came back and said, is there any statistics to show that a many or good number of web users would like to get obsolete data or resources? And I thought, wow, how do you even begin with this? And so we have, this is actually one of the toughest things to answer, is the question that you didn't anticipate, right? You just sort of thought that it was well understood. So I have a link here. We have a replay of Hurricane Katrina slides, and I urge you to take a look at that. That's the kind of thing that we need to be able to have in our pocket to be able to answer this question, because when you leave this room, you run into this question a lot. Expanding on that, we sort of get two broad, almost equally damaging notions about web archiving. One is sort of from that reviewer, right? That it's not an interesting problem, right? Who wants to go with the stale data? That's bad. We try to get rid of the bad data. The other thing is the Internet Archive has every copy of everything that's ever existed, so it's a solved problem, right? And because I heard a presentation about it once, it's, what else can be done? Obviously, that's not true. And the truth is somewhere in between, right? And that's where the interesting work lies. All right, so at Old Dominion, we're in the computer science department. We don't really have a collection. I'll put a little asterisk on that. We're trying to work with Archivit to try and set up a research-only mirror of their, that's how you know I'm from the South, right? I'm incapable of saying the word mirror, just one syllable. Well, a research copy of the Archivit collection so that we can build visualization tools and do some indexing experiments and so forth. Mostly we have historically worked on protocols, very boring things that don't make for good demos. Recently we've been trying to get into information visualization, so collection understanding, so you can immediately understand what's in one collection versus the other. And a variety of research things. We have a bunch of PhD students. We've managed to let a few of them escape, but we're holding the rest of them down. And we unchained one. Ahmed will be talking about his research after lunch. A variety of things here, but rather than talk about any one particular project, I really want to talk about sort of the general visions that are informing our research direction, some of the things that we think are important. We think this is the wrong metaphor for archives, and this is how most of our archives are set up, right? It's a sort of conventional library. It's a destination place where you go and you spend a leisurely afternoon, right? And that's nice, and but nobody really does that, right? Or very few people do that. So this is a problem for setting up our archives like this. The problem here is The left-hand side, the CNN page, that's a destination. That's a thing that people go to. The right-hand page, even in this, it's still not a destination, right? So some people know about it and they go about it, right? But to go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side is actually difficult. You need to move back and forth. That's one of the things that we were working on in Memento, is trying to get this more seamless integration of the past and the future web, so they can be available at the same time. So you don't have to know about archives as destinations, right? So they can be integrated. And the metaphor that I would like to see is sort of the carousel view in iTunes. So I'm in Europe. I have to put in a plug for my favorite band that nobody's heard of, The Cribs. Does anyone? I ask every year. Nobody knows. All right, check them out. Obviously I have all their CDs. But this is a very comfortable metaphor, right? So if we redefine the resource, in this case it's discography, we have various instantiations of the discography. But if we said this was the CNN homepage, right, what if we could just easily pop up, so like a carousel view, and access all the material that's stored in the various archives? I think people would really get it at that point. That would be, now there's a lot of difficult things to overcome to make this work, but I don't know, this seems like one possible metaphor that I think would go well. The other thing is, I think we failed to really turn archiving into a social activity, right? People share things, they post things, and so forth. Most of the sharing is done by reference. If we could actually integrate injection into the archive and turn that into a social archiving aspect, so that we can talk about sharing contents at a particular time and not just pointers to contents, then I think in the popular notion of this would really help. Now, the flip side of this is, if we're actually going to achieve this greater awareness within the general community, there's a trope in anyone watches zombie movies, Walking Dead, anything like that, right? Just me and a couple other people, right? So one of the things about zombie movies is you're not allowed to say the word zombie, right? And Shaun of the Dead, I have a quote there. It's a very funny movie that came out a few years ago. They poke fun at that, and one of the characters accidentally says the word zombie, and the other characters in the film said, so don't say that, that's ridiculous. So that's kind of the problem with archives, right? As soon as you show up and start talking about archives and libraries and so forth, everyone just sort of turns off, right? So I'm going to try and challenge us to not use the A word, because that's ridiculous, right? So if we get away from archiving as a term that we share in polite public, then I think you find that it's actually occurring more often than we expect, right? So Pinterest, I don't have an account on this. Apparently you have to be female or something. I don't really understand that, but it's really interesting. You can't read the URLs, but essentially it's sharing by value. You make copies of images, right? And so what we don't have is everyone's copying these images, and what we don't have is any machine-readable notion that this image is essentially a memento for this other image, right? So we're making copies of things for the purpose of social sharing, but we don't have any machine-readable notion of that. The other thing is some sites are actually doing archiving, but they don't call it archiving. They do it archiving because they're providing additional services. So I've become a huge fan of the site Topsy, and essentially Topsy is a Twitter archive. They don't tell you that, but that's what they are. So this is my favorite example. Here's a page of a tweet that no longer exists. You can click on that and you get they don't exist. But you can go and find it in Topsy. And it's actually, you can't read this, but it's the guy that wrote the no LOC, right? So that it would automatically delete your tweets so it doesn't show up in the Scary People Library of Congress archive. And but apparently he's completely unconcerned that it shows up forever in Topsy's archive. So use Topsy, find your own stuff, and find all your deleted tweets, right? How can you do that? Maybe you could get rid of them. I don't know all of the Topsy API and so forth, but basically they archive everything and don't delete it. So, but again, they don't call it an archive, so a lot of people don't know about that, right? All right. Another definitely has sort of like a horror film genre thing going on. One of the other tropes in a horror film is when you realize that the call is coming from within the house. This is from the 1979 film, right? The danger lurks from within. So this is actually the biggest problem that we have in archiving now, right? So the obvious thing is GeoCities. Now, it was bought by Yahoo, and then they promptly killed it. And we always point to that as the example of these lost web pages, right? And what I'm saying is these lost web pages are not very lost, right? There must be half a dozen completely uncoordinated GeoCity web archiving projects. But again, this is not available in a machine-readable aspect. The stuff that's in Internet Archive is, but there's a whole bunch of other projects that don't export that this page is a copy of this other page. And again, it's archiving projects, but it's not providing a unified interface that can find all of this material. So again, GeoCities is the best archived, unarchived site there is. Now, I mentioned I came from NASA. You might have been familiar with the NASA Technical Report Server. That's actually a project I started in 94, 95. And for a variety of reasons, it's been shut down, right? And so I have my NASA redaction, Houston Tranquility Base here at Eagle has landed, but we're not allowed to share that. So the NTRS has been shut down. And of course, the Internet Archive has copies of those reports, and I don't know how synchronized they are and if they have what's the latest copy and so forth. But actually, in previous, we helped set up some archives in the UK of the material, because when I was still working at NASA, I discovered that NASA information was too important to be left on NASA computers, and so you actually had to push it out so that it could survive. There's no good reason why this is, well, there's political reasons. Apparently, a U.S. congressman found out that Chinese national was working at NAFTA, so we had to shut everything down. And, very, very stupid. So I have a blog post about that if you're interested. And then the final thing I would say is who's going to archive the archives, right? So if you're familiar with web citation website, they're sort of asking for money, which on one hand I get, right? It was, it's turned into a production service or something. But it's also a little bit like extortion, right? We have your stuff, now give us some money. So what happens if this one guy, right, if he goes away and quits archiving the material, right? A lot of services depend on it. Now, again, I guess you could say it's like a social service, right? You get your money back or something like that. But this is something we've come to depend, but it's at risk right now. So I'm going to leave you with that. And that's some of the ideas that sort of motivating our thinking about web archiving and using approaches. Thank you.